My father wasn't the kind of man who wasted words. 26 years I'd known him, and I could count on both hands the number of times he'd told me something that didn't need saying. So when he walked into the kitchen that Tuesday morning, boots already on, coat already zipped, face carrying something I'd never seen on it before, and said, "Elliot, I need you to burn the barn." I didn't laugh. I didn't ask why. I just felt the hairs on my arms stand straight. It was 6:14 in the morning. I know the time because I was staring at the microwave clock, waiting for my coffee to reheat. Mom had been dead 3 years by then. Cancer. The quiet kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already eaten through everything that matters. After she passed, it was just me and Dad on the farm. 240 acres of soybean and cattle land in Hardin County, Iowa. Flat country. The kind of flat that lets you see trouble coming from a long way off, or so you'd think. "The barn," I repeated. He pulled out a chair, sat down across from me. His hands were trembling, and my father's hands did not tremble. Not when he set a broken calf's leg. Not when he pulled Mom's oxygen mask off for the last time and kissed her forehead. Not once. "The big barn, the one past the east field." He looked at me the way he looked at weather, measuring it for damage. "Everything in it, before 8 o'clock. Dad, there are 19 head of cattle in that barn. I know exactly what's in that barn." Something was wrong with the way he said it. Not the words, the gravity behind them. Like he was already mourning something he hadn't told me about yet. "Did something get into the herd? Chronic wasting? Brucellosis?" He shook his head slowly. "Worse." I waited. The coffee beeped. I didn't move. "Last night, around 2 in the morning, I went out to check on the Muller calf, the one that wasn't feeding right." He paused, rubbed the heel of his palm across his left eye. Something was wrong with her. She was standing, but not the way cattle stand. She was rigid, head cocked sideways like she was listening to something underground. And her eyes? He stopped again. I leaned forward. "What about her eyes?" "They were open, Elliot, but there was nothing behind them. Nothing at all. And then she turned toward me, and she made a sound I've never heard a living animal make. My father had been a cattle farmer for 41 years. He'd heard every sound a cow could make: birth, death, distress, rage, fear. All of it. I backed out, locked the barn, drove to the Andersons' place, and called Ray Mueller. He paused again. This one lasted longer. "Ray's been sick since Thursday. His wife Karen said he went out to check his own herd Saturday night and came back with a bite on his forearm. She said he's been in bed since. Won't eat, won't talk. Just stares at the wall and makes this sound in his throat like grinding." The kitchen felt smaller. The morning light through the window looked different, thinner. I called the extension office on the way back. No answer. Called the state veterinary hotline. Automated message said they were experiencing unprecedented call volume, and to try again later. He stood up. Then I turned on the radio. "There's something happening, Elliot. Not just here. Broader than here." I listened for 40 minutes. They're not saying the word yet, but I can hear it in the gaps between what they are saying. "What word?" He didn't answer. He reached across the table and gripped my wrist hard, the way he'd grabbed me once when I was 9 and almost stepped on a copperhead. "Burn the barn. Use the diesel from the equipment shed. Don't go inside. Don't open the doors. Pour it around the base and light it from the south side where the wind will carry it away from the house. Do it before 8 o'clock. Why 8? Because at 8 o'clock I'm driving into town, and I may not make it back. And if I don't make it back, I need to know that barn is ash. That was my father. No drama, no embellishment. Just the clearest, most terrifying sentence anyone had ever spoken to me. He left the kitchen. I heard him in the mudroom, pulling things off shelves, the emergency weather radio, the first aid kit, the lockbox where he kept the point, 30-06, and the Remington 870. I stood in the kitchen holding my lukewarm coffee and feeling the world rearrange itself around me, like furniture being dragged across a floor in the dark. I turned on the radio. Not the emergency one, just the countertop AM/FM that Mom used to play while she cooked. I found WHO Des Moines first. The morning anchor was talking in that controlled voice newscasters use when they're reading something they don't fully believe. Reports of unusual animal behavior across central Iowa, with isolated incidents of aggressive contact between livestock and handlers. The Iowa Department of Agriculture has issued a precautionary advisory urging farmers to limit direct contact with symptomatic animals and to report any unusual aggression to... I switched to 1040. Same story, different words. Then I tried the FM stations. 2 of them were playing music like nothing was happening. One was running a syndicated talk show. The host was laughing about something political. I turned the dial again and landed on a station out of Waterloo, where a woman was speaking in a voice stripped of all professional composure. I'm telling you what my brother told me an hour ago. He's an EMT in Grundy Center. They've had 17 calls since midnight. 17. Not car accidents, not heart attacks, bites. People biting people. And the ones who got bitten aren't going to the hospital. They're going home and locking their doors. And then their families are calling 911 4 hours later because the signal cut. Dead air. Then music and automated playlist kicking in because no one was at the controls. I set the coffee down. My hands were steady. I want to be honest about that because it matters later when they weren't. In that moment, standing in my mother's kitchen, hearing fragments of something enormous and terrible trying to push through the ordinary fabric of a Tuesday morning, I was calm. Not because I was brave, because I hadn't caught up yet. The understanding was still traveling toward me like sound from a distant explosion, light first, then noise, then the shock wave. I found Dad in the mudroom loading shells into a canvas bag. He had the truck keys on the counter and a handwritten list on the back of an envelope. I read it upside down. Fuel, ammo, antibiotics, water jugs, Nora. Who's Nora? Nora Voss. She lives alone off Route 175. 72 years old. No car. No family within 200 miles. If things go the way I think they're going, no one's coming for her. That was my father. What if I come with you? Then no one burns the barn. It can wait. It can't. He finally looked at me and I saw it fully, the thing I'd never seen on his face before. It wasn't fear. My father had made his peace with fear decades ago. It was grief. Preemptive grief. The mourning of a man who had looked at the math of what was coming and understood that the answers would cost him things he couldn't replace. Elliot. Whatever's in that barn isn't cattle anymore. Not all of them. Maybe not any of them. And when the sun gets high and the heat builds, and whatever this thing is finishes doing what it's doing to them, those walls won't hold. You've seen a panicked steer come through a gate. Imagine 19 of them, and they're not panicked. They're hungry. I didn't argue. I couldn't. The certainty in his voice was absolute. The same certainty he'd had when he told me Mom wasn't going to make it. 2 weeks before the doctors said the same thing. My father saw things clearly. It was his gift and his curse. He put his hand on my shoulder, squeezed once. I'll be back before noon. If I'm not back by 2, take the Bronco and drive north. Don't stop until you hit Highway 20, then go west toward Fort Dodge. Your Uncle Gene's place. You remember the way?" "I remember." "Good." He picked up the canvas bag and the keys. At the door, he stopped. "Don't open the barn, Elliot. Whatever you hear." Then he was gone. The truck kicked gravel. The sound faded. And I was alone on 240 acres with a barn full of something my father, the most unshakable man I'd ever known, was afraid of. The equipment shed was 100 yards east of the house. I walked there in the gray light of a morning that felt like it was holding its breath. The fields were empty. The sky was low and overcast, the kind of Iowa ceiling that presses down on you like a hand on your chest. No birds. I noticed that. Not a single bird. The diesel was in 2 50-gallon drums near the back wall. I grabbed 2 5-gallon jerry cans and filled them. The fuel glugging in that thick way diesel does slower than gasoline, more deliberate. I loaded them into the wheelbarrow along with a box of Strike Anywhere matches and a rag. Then I started walking toward the east field. The barn was old. Built in 1947 by my grandfather, rebuilt partially after the derecho in 2020. It was solid oak frame, corrugated steel siding Dad had added in the 90s. Concrete foundation. It would burn, but it would take time and commitment. The diesel would handle the wood. The steel would warp and collapse inward. That was the theory. I was halfway across the east field when I heard them. Not mooing, not lowing. Something between a groan and a vibration. A low, sustained resonance that seemed to come from the walls of the barn itself. As if the structure were a throat producing a sound no building should make. It traveled across the field and settled into my sternum like a second heartbeat. I stopped walking. The wheelbarrow handles were slick under my palms. The barn was still 200 yards away, and already I could feel it pulling at something primal in me, some deep brain circuit that predates language, that exists only to say, "Turn around." I didn't turn around. I kept walking. But I want to be clear. Every step from that point forward was a choice. Not instinct, not courage. Choice. The conscious, grinding override of every signal my body was sending me. At 100 yards, I could see the barn doors. They were closed, the big sliding doors on the south face that Dad and I had retracked 2 summers ago. They were latched with a heavy crossbar, same as always. But they were moving, not swinging, pulsing. Something on the other side was pressing against them in a rhythm that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with intent. The sound was louder now. Not one voice, many, but synchronized, like they'd found a frequency together. A chorus of ruined throats producing a single sustained note that made my teeth ache. I set the wheelbarrow down 50 yards from the south wall, uncapped the first jerry can. The diesel smell cut through the morning air, sharp and industrial. And for one irrational second, I was grateful for it, because it replaced the other smell, the one drifting from the barn. Sweet and wrong, like fruit rotting in standing water. I started pouring along the base of the south wall, working east. The diesel soaked into the old wood of the lower frame where it met the concrete. I moved quickly, not running but not lingering, keeping my eyes on the wall and the doors and the narrow gaps in the siding where, if I looked, which I was trying not to, I could see movement, shapes that were the wrong proportions for cattle, too angular, too vertical. I emptied the first can and started the second on the east wall. The sound from inside shifted. The unified drone broke apart into individual voices, not animal, not human, something stranded between. And I realized they knew I was there. They could hear me, or smelled the diesel, or sensed the heat of a living body moving along the perimeter of their enclosure. Something hit the east wall from inside. The steel buckled outward 6 inches and snapped back. I jumped sideways, dropped the jerry can, caught it before it spilled more than a cup. My heart was in my throat. My steady hands were shaking now. I finished the east wall, moved to the north, poured, moved to the west, poured, came back around to the south where I'd started, completing the perimeter. 10 gallons of diesel soaking into the wooden bones of a barn that had stood for nearly 80 years. I pulled the rag from my pocket, soaked it, twisted it into a rope, lit a match. The doors pulsed again. A seam opened between them 2 inches, maybe 3. Through the gap I saw an eye. One eye. It was milky and white, threaded with dark veins, and it was locked onto me with the fixation of something that had forgotten everything it ever was except hunger. I touched the match to the rag. The rag caught. I laid it against the base of the south wall, where the diesel was thickest, and stepped back. The fire took hold like it had been waiting. I watched from the middle of the east field. The fire climbed the south wall first, eating through the old oak frame below the steel with a sound like tearing canvas. Smoke, black and greasy, twisted upward into the overcast sky. Within 3 minutes, the entire south face was involved, and the steel panels were glowing cherry red along their lower edges. The sounds from inside changed. The coordinated drone broke into something chaotic. Shrieks and crashes, bodies colliding with walls, hooves or something like hooves hammering against the concrete floor. I could hear the structural beams groaning as the fire weakened them. A section of the east wall buckled outward, and something pressed through the gap ahead, or what had been ahead, black and swollen, jaw distended, eye sockets weeping fluid that wasn't tears. It got stuck. The gap was too narrow. It thrashed, wedged between 2 steel panels that were already softening in the heat. The sound it made wasn't pain. Pain requires the awareness of damage, the survival instinct that says, stop, pull back, protect yourself. This sound was frustration. Pure, mindless frustration at an obstacle between itself and the living thing standing in the field. The steel panels bent further. I thought it might push through. But the fire reached the east wall, and the heat drove it backward. Or the heat destroyed whatever was still functional in its body, and it slumped and went still and began to burn. The barn collapsed inward at 7:38 a.m. The roof went first, the oak ridge beams snapping with a crack that echoed off the tree line a quarter-mile north. Then the walls folded like a closing hand, and everything inside was buried under burning steel and timber. The fire would take hours to consume it all, but the structure was done. The containment was done. Whatever those 19 animals had become was burning, and it would keep burning until there was nothing left. I stood in the field and watched. The smoke column climbed high enough to flatten against the cloud ceiling and spread east. My face was hot from the radiant heat even at 50 yards. My hands had stopped shaking. Something had settled in me, not calm exactly, but a kind of commitment. I had crossed a line. I had burned living things, even if they weren't living in any way that mattered anymore. And I had done it because my father told me to, and because I believed him. It was 7:52 when I walked back to the house. Dad had been gone for almost 2 hours. The radio on the kitchen counter was still on. I sat down and listened. Who Des Moines was different now. The controlled anchor voice was gone, replaced by someone younger who kept clearing his throat between sentences. The advisory language had shifted. Precautionary had become urgent. Unusual animal behavior had become aggressive incidents involving both livestock and individuals. They were still not saying the word, but they were circling it like water around a drain. I tried Dad's cell phone. No signal. No answer. No signal. The network was either overloaded or down. I tried the landline, dial tone, then nothing. Then a recorded message. All circuits are busy. Please try your call again later. I went to the front window. The gravel road that connected our property to County Road E41 ran straight south for a mile before hitting the T intersection. From the window, I could see about half that distance. It was empty. No cars, no movement. Just flat Iowa farmland under a gray sky with a column of black smoke rising behind me. At 8:30, I saw the first vehicle. A white pickup looked like the Andersons' Ford moving fast on E41, heading west. Too fast. It disappeared behind the tree line before I could see who was driving. 15 minutes later, another vehicle. Then two more, both heading the same direction. West toward Highway 65, away from town. That was when the first real current of fear moved through me. Not the abstract dread of the morning, not the adrenaline of the barn. This was specific and sharp. People were running, and they were running away from the direction my father had driven. By 10 a.m., I had packed the Bronco. Water jugs, canned food, the medical kit, blankets. The Remington 870 Dad had left behind, loaded with a box of shells in the glove compartment, a hatchet, 2 changes of clothes, Mom's photo from the mantel, the one where she's laughing on the porch with her hair down. I told myself I was preparing in case Dad didn't come back by 2. I told myself I was being practical. But I was already listening for the truck, and the silence where its engine should have been was growing louder by the minute. At 10:40, I couldn't wait anymore. Not until 2. Not until noon. I got in the Bronco and drove south toward town. The first mile was normal. Fields, fence posts, a red-tailed hawk sitting on a utility pole, the first bird I'd seen all morning. And it was facing away from me, oriented southeast, perfectly still, as if watching something I couldn't see. At the T intersection, I turned east toward Route 175 instead of south toward town. I told myself I was checking on Nora Voss. That's what Dad would have wanted. But the truth is, I was afraid of what I'd find in town. And Nora's place was a smaller, more manageable fear. Route 175 was empty. I drove 4 miles without seeing another vehicle. The farms I passed looked normal from a distance, houses, outbuildings, equipment in the yards, but there was an absence of activity that felt deliberate. No one in the fields, no dogs in the yards. Curtains drawn at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Nora's place was a small white house, set back from the road behind a windbreak of Scotch pines. Her late husband Earl had been a friend of my father's. They'd served together on the County Soil Conservation Board for 15 years. She was sharp, practical, and had survived Earl's death. 2 knee replacements, and the 2020 derecho without complaint. If anyone could be told the world was ending and respond with composure, it was Nora Voss. I pulled into her driveway. Her front door was open. Not ajar, wide open, screen door hanging loose on one hinge. I sat in the Bronco for a full minute, engine running, staring at that open door. The Remington was on the passenger seat. I picked it up, checked the chamber, stepped out. Nora? No answer. The wind moved through the Scotch pines with a sound like slow breathing. Nora, it's Elliot Danes, Frank's boy. I crossed the yard, climbed the porch steps. The screen door's broken hinge was fresh. The wood around the screw holes was pale and splintered, torn recently. Inside, the house was dim and tidy. Nora kept a clean home, Everything in its place, the ceramic rooster collection on the shelf, the crocheted Afghan on the couch, the framed needlepoint Bible verse above the kitchen doorway. The Lord is my shepherd. I smelled coffee, recently brewed, and beneath it, something else. That sweet, wrong smell. Fainter than the barn, but present. The kitchen was empty, coffee pot still warm, one mug on the counter, half full. A chair pulled away from the table at an angle that suggested someone had stood up quickly. I moved down the hallway. Bathroom door open, empty. Bedroom door closed. I knocked. "Nora, it's Elliot." A sound came from behind the door, not a voice, not the grinding my father had described. Something softer, a rhythmic scraping, like a fingernail drawn slowly across fabric, over and over, steady, patient. I reached for the knob. Then I pulled my hand back. I remembered what my father said. "Don't open the barn, whatever you hear." This wasn't the barn, but the principle held. Some doors, once opened, stay open. I stepped back. I stood in Nora's hallway, in the home of a 72-year-old woman who had outlived her husband and her children and most of her friends. And I listened to the sound behind her bedroom door, and I understood that I could not help her. That whatever was making that sound was not Nora anymore. Or was Nora in a way that was worse than not being Nora, trapped inside something that had rewritten the rules of her body. I left the house. I closed the front door behind me. I sat in the Bronco and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. Then I drove south, toward town, because my father was there, and the only thing worse than what I might find was not knowing. Eldora, Iowa. Population 2,624, according to the sign on Highway 175. The seat of Hardin County, a town built around a courthouse square with a Hy-Vee grocery, 2 churches, a Casey's General Store, a farm implement dealer, and an assisted living facility called Meadow View that always smelled like industrial cleaner and microwaved green beans. I came in from the north on 175 and knew immediately that something had already happened here. Not something beginning, something that had happened and moved on, leaving its evidence behind like flood water leaves mud. The first thing I saw was a Hardin County Sheriff's cruiser parked diagonally across the northbound lane. Doors open, light bar still flashing. No one inside. A long smear of something dark across the hood, wrist high, as if someone had been dragged across it. I slowed the Bronco to a crawl. The Remington was across my lap now, safety off. The streets around the courthouse square were scattered with vehicles, some parked, some stopped in the middle of intersections, some with doors open. The Casey's had a shattered front window. The Hy-Vee parking lot held maybe 30 cars, but no people. I passed the courthouse. The front doors were chained from the outside. Fresh chain, bright silver. Someone had locked those doors to keep something in or keep something out. And either possibility made my stomach tighten. On South Edgington Avenue, I found them. 3 people standing in a front yard, not moving, not speaking. Standing in that rigid, slightly cocked posture my father had described in the Mueller calf. Heads tilted, bodies taut, eyes open and empty. 2 men and a woman. The woman was wearing a Hy-Vee apron. One of the men was in a bathrobe. The other was fully dressed, car keys still in his hand. They turned toward the Bronco as I passed. All 3, simultaneously, with a synchronization that eliminated any possibility of coincidence or volition. They turned the way a compass needle turns not because it chooses to, but because it has no capacity to do otherwise. I accelerated. In the rearview mirror, I saw them begin to walk. Not run, walk. measured and relentless, oriented toward the sound of my engine with a precision that made distance feel temporary. I circled south toward the grain elevator, then east on Highway 6 toward the edge of town. I was looking for Dad's truck, the red Chevy with the dented tailgate, and the faded Danes Cattle Company magnetic sign on the door. I drove every street I could safely access. Some were blocked by vehicles. Some had figures in them standing or walking, or hunched over shapes on the ground that I didn't look at long enough to identify. I found his truck on the west side of town, parked in front of the Eldora Family Medical Clinic. Doors closed, engine off. The canvas bag was still on the passenger seat. The driver's door was unlocked. I parked behind it, got out, stood in the empty parking lot of a small town medical clinic with the Remington in my hands and the air tasting like copper and smoke. The clinic's glass door was intact. Inside, I could see the waiting room, chairs in rows, magazines on a table, a reception window with a sliding glass panel open. No movement, no lights. The power was out, or someone had shut it off. I went inside. Dad? The waiting room was empty. Behind the reception desk, papers were scattered across the floor. A phone was off the hook, emitting the rapid beeping of a deadline. The door to the exam rooms was propped open with a rubber doorstop. I moved through. Exam room 1, empty. Exam room 2, empty, but with a medical supply cabinet standing open and half cleared out of bandages, antibiotics, suture kits gone. Someone had grabbed what they could. Exam room 3, a man face down on the floor, white coat, stethoscope still around his neck. I didn't turn him over. The smell told me what I needed to know, and the stillness. The complete, total stillness of something that had stopped being a person and hadn't become the other thing. Just stopped. At the end of the hall, a supply closet. The door was closed. A mop handle had been wedged through the lever handle, bracing it shut from the outside. I removed the mop handle, opened the door. My father was sitting on the floor between shelving units, his back against the wall, the .30-06 across his knees. His left forearm was wrapped in gauze, and the gauze was soaked through with something dark and wet. He looked up at me with clear eyes. "Did you burn the barn?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He closed his eyes. "I got bit, Elliot, about an hour ago. I was trying to get Nora's medication from the pharmacy when one of them came through the back door." He opened his eyes again. "I barricaded myself in here because I didn't know how fast it works. But I can feel it. I can feel it starting." He told me what he knew. Not everything he was already organizing, editing, giving me only what I needed to survive. That was his way. Even dying, he was efficient. It's fast in some people, slow in others. Ray Muller went down in about 6 hours. Karen told me on the phone before the lines cut. But the man in exam room 3, Dr. Paulson, he was bitten yesterday and was still himself this morning. He was the one who wrapped my arm. He was coherent, clear, working. Then around 9 o'clock, he just stopped talking, sat down on the floor. I watched his eyes change. It's like watching a lake freeze over. You can see the surface going solid, but you know underneath the water's still moving. I was kneeling in front of him, my hands on his knees, the Remington on the floor beside me. The closet was small and bright with the door open, fluorescent light from the hallway reaching in. "How long ago were you bitten?" "Maybe 90 minutes. "And you feel it?" "In my arm. It's warm, not infection warm, not like a fever. Something else. Like the blood in that arm is moving in a different direction than the rest of me." He looked looked at his wrapped forearm. I figure I've got 3 hours, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. But I'm not going to count on luck. He told me about the drive into town, how the roads had been empty at first, then suddenly not people walking on the highway's shoulder, heading in no particular direction, moving with that synchronized purpose that I'd now seen myself. He told me about the gas station at the junction of 175 and Highway 6, where a woman had been standing behind the counter, not serving customers, just standing and making that low grinding sound. He told me about the National Guard convoy he'd seen heading east on Highway 20. 4 trucks and an armored vehicle, and how they were driving fast, not toward the problem, but parallel to it, as if establishing a perimeter they didn't intend to cross. This isn't going to be over, Elliot. Not the way people want it to be. Not with the Guard or the government or anyone riding in to fix it. This is a wave, and you don't stop a wave. You survive it. I'm not leaving you here. You are. I'm not. He looked at me with an expression I'd only seen once before when I was 17, and drove the tractor into the drainage ditch. And he had to pull me out with the truck and a chain. And instead of yelling at me, he sat on the tailgate and said very quietly, "You're going to have to be smarter than this." Same expression, same quiet, total seriousness. "Elliot, listen carefully. You're going to take the Bronco and drive north. Not to Jean's. There's no time for Fort Dodge. You're going to go to the Hardin County Fairgrounds. The big livestock building, Building C, the one with the steel roof. It's solid. It has water. It has a generator in the maintenance room. It's set back from the road and has limited access points." "Why not the house?" "Because the house is 200 yards from a barn I asked you to burn. And when that fire dies down, anything that survived anything in the fields, anything drawn by the smoke, is going to converge on the only other structure nearby." He was right. I knew he was right. The farm was compromised. There are going to be other people, Elliot. At the fairgrounds, on the roads, in the fields. Some of them will be themselves. Some of them won't. You need to be able to tell the difference quickly, and you need to be willing to act on what you see. How do I tell? The eyes. Always the eyes. The sick ones, their eyes don't track the way ours do. They lock on. Fixed point. No saccades, no scanning. They find you, and they hold you. And the sound. If they're making the sound, they're gone. He shifted, winced. His hand went to his forearm, and he held it away from his body like it was a separate creature. "Take the guns, both of them. Take the medical supplies from the cabinet, whatever Paulson didn't get. Take water, take the emergency radio, and take this." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I opened it. A hand-drawn map of the fairgrounds with Building C circled. The generator location marked with a star, the water access points marked with X's. He'd drawn this, sometime between the barn and the bite, in the truck or in the clinic. He'd sat down and drawn me a survival map on the back of a medical intake form. "Dad, don't." His voice cracked for the first and only time. "Don't make this harder. You're going to survive this. You're my son, and you're going to survive this. And that's all that matters." I wanted to argue. I wanted to pick him up and carry him to the Bronco and drive until the road ended. But I looked at his arm, and I looked at his eyes still clear, still his, but with something moving behind them like clouds crossing a wide sky. And I understood the math he'd already done, the math that said, one of us survives, and it has to be you. I held his hand, his good hand. For 2 minutes, we sat there in that supply closet and didn't speak. and the silence was full of everything we'd ever said to each other, and everything we never would. Then he pulled his hand away. Go. The Hardin County Fairgrounds sat on 40 acres north of town, just off D35. I'd been there 100 times, county fair every July, 4-H shows, a tractor pull once that ended with Ray Muller's International Harvester in a drainage pond. Normal memories. The kind you don't appreciate until normal becomes extinct. I pulled the Bronco through the main gate at 12:15 p.m. The fairgrounds were empty. The exhibition buildings were locked. The midway area where the carnival set up every summer was just bare concrete and electrical hookups. Building C was at the northwest corner, a large steel and concrete livestock exhibition hall, windowless on 3 sides, with 2 rolling garage doors on the south face and a single personnel door on the east. I parked the Bronco against the east wall, tight enough that it partially blocked the personnel door from being approached. Then I checked the building. Dad's map was accurate. The generator was in a utility room, off the northwest corner, a diesel unit, the kind that could run for days on a full tank. The tank read 3/4. I didn't start it. Noise was a currency I couldn't afford to spend yet. The main hall was vast, an open concrete floor, steel trusses, exhibition stalls along both long walls. There were still livestock stalls set up from something, maybe the spring 4-H show. I found the water access, a utility sink in the prep area, and 2 frost-free hydrants on the north wall. I turned one. Water came. I let it run, filled 2 jugs, then shut it off. I unloaded the Bronco methodically. Guns, food, water, medical supplies, blankets, tools. I set up in one of the livestock stalls near the east door, the one closest to my exit route. I laid out the supplies on the rubber mat flooring, Remington within reach, 30-06 propped against the wall, hatchet on the floor by my right hand. Then I sat down, and the silence hit me. My father was dying, right now, in a supply closet in a medical clinic in a town that had already fallen. The man who raised me was feeling his blood change direction, his thoughts slow, his self dissolve. And I was sitting in a livestock stall at the county fairgrounds, arranging canned goods on a rubber mat. I pressed my palms against my eyes and breathed. I didn't cry, not because I was holding it back, because the grief was too big, too immediate. It hadn't solidified into something tears could carry yet. It was still vapor, filling every space inside me, too diffuse to condense. At 1 p.m., I heard a vehicle on D35. I went to the south wall and found a gap between 2 panels where I could see the road. A silver minivan was heading north, fast. It passed the fairgrounds without slowing. Then another vehicle, a dark SUV going the same direction. Then nothing for 20 minutes. At 1:30, a woman appeared on foot. She came from the east, walking quickly across the open ground between the fairgrounds and the tree line that bordered Honey Creek. She was carrying a child, a girl, maybe 3 or 4, and a backpack. She moved with purpose, scanning her surroundings, heading for the fairgrounds like she knew the layout. I watched her reach the south face of Building C and try the rolling garage doors. Locked. She went around to the east side and found the personnel door partially blocked by the Bronco. She stopped, looked at the vehicle, looked at the building. Then she called out, not loudly, "Is someone in there?" I could have stayed silent. She would have moved on, found somewhere else, become someone else's calculation. I opened the door. She was mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, face flushed from exertion and fear. The child was asleep against her shoulder or unconscious, I couldn't tell. The woman's eyes were clear. Scanning, tracking, alive with the darting intelligence of a person who was still entirely herself. "I'm Elliot," I said. "June." She adjusted the child's weight. "This is Lily, my daughter. She's not bit. I'm not bit. We came from the elementary school. I'm a teacher there. First grade." She paused. Or I was. I stepped aside. She came in. That was the first decision that changed everything. June Harker, 34, first grade teacher at South Hardin Elementary. Single mother, originally from Cedar Falls but had moved to Eldora 3 years ago for the teaching position and the lower cost of living. She told me all of this in the first 5 minutes, not because she was chatty, but because she understood instinctively, precisely, that establishing identity was a survival act. Strangers are threats. People with names and histories and daughters are potential allies. Lily woke up 20 minutes after they arrived. She blinked at the steel trusses above her, at the livestock stalls, at me, and said, "Where are the animals?" "There aren't any right now, sweetheart," June said. "Good," Lily said, and closed her eyes again. June told me what she'd seen. She'd been at the school since 7 a.m., preparing her classroom for the day. Students started arriving at 7:45. By 8:15, half the expected children hadn't shown up. By 8:30, the principal, a man named Dale Worthy, had called an emergency staff meeting. He'd been on the phone with the superintendent, who'd been on the phone with the county emergency management office, who'd told him, in language stripped of specificity, to shelter in place and await further instruction. Further instruction never came, June said. She was sitting against the wall of the stall opposite mine, Lily curled in her lap. Dale locked the school down. Standard protocol, we've drilled it for active shooters. Lock the doors, cover the windows, keep the children quiet. But this wasn't a shooter. At 9 o'clock, the bus from the north route arrived, and the driver was already different. Different how? He pulled up to the curb and just sat there. Engine running, door open. Kids were supposed to file off, but none of them moved. The aide who went out to check on them, Mrs. Gunderson, she'd been working that route for 20 years. She walked up the bus steps and stopped. Just froze. Dale was watching from the window. He said Mrs. Gunderson stood there for about 10 seconds, then turned around and walked back toward the school, and her face was, he said it looked like someone had wiped it clean, like all the expression had been removed. The children on the bus? June's arms tightened around Lily. They weren't children anymore, not in the way that matters. She'd taken Lily and left through the cafeteria exit at 9:20, after the bus driver broke through the front entrance, and 2 of the staff members who'd gone to investigate didn't come back. She'd walked east, staying off the main roads, moving through backyards and creek beds, heading for the fairgrounds because her ex-husband had worked maintenance there one summer and she knew the layout. "Did you see my father's truck?" I asked. "Red Chevy, outside the medical clinic." She thought. "I didn't go near Main Street. I went south of the square and cut through the park." I nodded. It didn't matter. I already knew. We spent the next hour making the space livable. June was methodical. She approached the livestock stall the way she probably approached her classroom. Zones of function, sleeping area, supply area. A corner for Lily with a blanket and the Afghan I'd brought from the house. She asked about food, water, weapons, exits. She counted ammunition. She assessed the building's structural vulnerabilities with the eye of someone who'd grown up in tornado country and understood that walls are only as strong as their weakest seam. "The garage doors are the problem," she said. "They're steel, but the tracks are anchored to the frame with bolts, and the frame is wood under the steel cladding. Enough pressure, and they'll give." How do you know that? My ex was a contractor before he was a maintenance worker and before he was an ex. She paused. He's in Des Moines, or was. I haven't been able to reach him since yesterday. I didn't offer reassurance. She didn't want it. She wanted accuracy. And the accurate answer was that Des Moines, with its 250,000 people, was likely worse than anything we'd seen in Hardin County. At 3 p.m., 2 more people arrived. A teenage boy, maybe 16, came through the tree line alone, moving in a low crouch, carrying a compound bow and a quiver of hunting arrows. His name was Marcus Beale. He'd been homeschooled, lived on a farm south of Steamboat Rock, and had watched his mother and his younger brother turn overnight. He'd locked himself in the grain bin until morning, then started walking. 20 minutes after Marcus, a man in his 50s appeared on D35, driving a green John Deere tractor at full throttle, which for that model was about 20 miles an hour. He pulled into the fairgrounds like he was arriving for a livestock auction, climbed down, and introduced himself as Dale Went. Retired, diabetic, former Marine. He had a .45 on his hip and a cooler full of insulin in one hand and a Bible in the other. Figured the fairgrounds would draw sensible people, Dale said, scanning Building C with an appraiser's eye. Solid structure, water access, defensible. 5 of us now, including a sleeping 4-year-old. 5 people in a building designed for cattle, hiding from something that turned cattle and people into something without a name yet. I thought of my father's supply closet. I thought of the map he'd drawn me. I thought of his hand gripping mine. Then I started planning, because that's what he would have done. We divided the night into 4 watches. Marcus took the first, 8 p.m. to midnight. His eyes were young, and he'd proven, by surviving a night in a grain bin while his family turned, that he could hold fear at a distance long enough to function. Dale took midnight to 3 a.m. He said he barely slept anymore. Anyway, the diabetes, the age, the memories of whatever he'd seen in the Marine Corps that he never discussed. June took 3 o'clock to 5 a.m. I took 5 o'clock to dawn. We barricaded the garage doors with livestock panels, heavy steel gates designed to contain 1,200-pound bulls. We stacked them 3 deep and braced them with angle iron. The personnel door we reinforced with a wooden beam across brackets that Dale fashioned from materials in the maintenance room. It wasn't impenetrable. Nothing was. But it would slow anything down long enough for us to respond. The first night was quiet in a way that felt intentional. Not the absence of sound, the suppression of it. The air outside carried that low-frequency vibration I'd heard at the barn, but distant now, coming from the direction of town. A sustained, communal drone, rising and falling. As if the entire infected population of Eldora had found their shared note and were holding it like a choir, warming up for a performance that would never end. Marcus sat by the gap in the south wall, compound bow across his knees, an arrow nocked but not drawn. I couldn't sleep, so I sat with him for the first hour. "How did your brother look?" I asked. I shouldn't have. It was too direct, too soon. But Marcus answered without flinching, and I realized he wanted to talk about it. Needed to. The telling was a kind of containment if he could put the experience into words. It was outside him instead of inside. He came into my room around 3 a.m. I woke up because I heard the door. I thought he was having a nightmare. He's 10. He still has them sometimes. Had them. Marcus paused, but didn't correct the tense again. He was standing at the foot of my bed, just standing there. And I said, "Connor, go back to bed." And he didn't move. I reached for the lamp and when the light came on, I saw his face, and I knew. Knew what? That Connor was gone. That whatever was standing in my room, wearing Connor's pajamas and Connor's face, wasn't my brother. The eyes were wrong. They were looking at me. But they weren't seeing me. They were seeing meat, biology, something to consume. He exhaled slowly. I went through the window, ground floor, so it was easy. I ran to the grain bin and climbed the ladder and pulled the hatch shut, and I sat up there for 5 hours, listening to them move around below me. My mom and Connor, walking in circles, making that sound. The grinding. Yeah, like teeth on stone. We sat in silence. The drone from town pulsed. Lily murmured in her sleep, and June shifted to pull the blanket higher over her daughter's shoulders without waking. I had a clear shot from the top of the bin, Marcus said quietly. When the sun came up and I could see them. Mom was in the yard. Connor was by the porch. I drew back twice. He looked at his bow. I couldn't release. Not because I thought they might get better. I knew they wouldn't. I just couldn't be the one who ended what was left of them, even if what was left was nothing. I thought of the barn, the fire, the eye in the gap between the doors. I had burned 19 cattle without hesitation, but I'd never seen a human face through the flames. Marcus had looked at his mother's face down the shaft of an arrow, and his fingers had refused. "You made the right call," I said. I don't know about right. I made the call I could live with. There was a difference. I was beginning to learn it. Dale relieved Marcus at midnight with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done watch rotations before. He settled into position with his .45 drawn and his Bible in his lap, and he told me to sleep. I didn't. Not really. I lay on the rubber mat in the livestock stall and stared at the steel trusses above me and listened to the building settle and the wind press against the walls and the distant chorus of the infected, and thought about my father. By now, it had been 10 hours since the bite. He was either gone or he was something else, and both of those things meant the same thing. The supply closet was empty. The .30-06 was on the floor. The man who had made me was nowhere. The second day brought 3 more survivors, and one of them brought the question that would divide us. The first 2 arrived together around 10 a.m. A married couple, Terrence and Willa Oakes, late 40s. He'd been a dispatcher for the Hardin County Sheriff's Office. She'd been a nurse at Meadowview. They came in Terrence's personal vehicle, a black Tahoe with the sheriff's radio still mounted on the dash. The radio was on. It was receiving, intermittently, fragments of communication from scattered law enforcement and National Guard units. None of the fragments were reassuring. "Last thing I heard that made sense was around 6 a.m., Terrence said. He was a tall man with a shaved head and a controlled demeanor that reminded me of my father, someone who processed information before displaying emotion. Guard unit out of Camp Dodge was establishing a containment line along Highway 30. East-west corridor. Everything south of 30 they're treating as lost. Everything north they're trying to hold. "We're north of 30, June said. "Barely. And trying to hold is not the same as holding." The transmissions I was hearing were fragmented, disorganized. Unit call signs I didn't recognize. Overlapping orders. At one point, someone was screaming coordinates, and the response was just dead air. Willa had brought medical supplies from Meadowview Real Supplies, professional grade. Antibiotics, wound dressings, a suture kit, pain medication. She organized them on a folding table in the prep area, with the same precision June organized the stall. Competent people, I was learning, remain competent under pressure. The skills don't evaporate. They sharpen. The third arrival came in the afternoon, and he changed everything. His name was Sam Aldridge, 28. He stumbled into the fairgrounds on foot, pale and shaking, from the south, from the direction of town. He was holding his left hand against his chest, wrapped in a t-shirt that was stiff with dried blood. Willa moved to help him. Terrence stopped her. "Show us the wound," Terrence said. Not aggressive, clinical. Sam unwrapped the t-shirt. The bite was on the meaty part of his left palm, between the thumb and index finger. 4 puncture marks. The skin around them was inflamed, but not in the way of normal infection. The veins radiating from the wound were darkened, visible, like rivers on a map drawn in ink. "When?" Terrence asked. "Last night, around 1100. I was trying to get to my car, and one of them grabbed me through a fence." That was 14 hours ago. Sam's eyes were clear. His speech was coherent. He was frightened, but appropriately so, the fear of a man in danger, not the blankness of someone being overwritten. 14 hours, Dale said from the corner, where he'd been cleaning the .45. He said it flatly, as a fact, not a judgment. But the fact itself carried weight. Dad had said Dr. Paulson lasted from one day to the next morning. Ray Muller had gone in 6 hours. We had no baseline, no reliable timeline. 14 hours might mean Sam was resistant. It might mean he was slow burning. It might mean nothing. We let him in. We gave him water and food. Willa examined the wound, cleaned it, bandaged it properly. Sam sat against the wall, good hand wrapped around a water bottle, and told us he was a diesel mechanic from Iowa Falls, in Eldora visiting a friend when the world folded. For 2 hours, he was fine. He ate, he talked. He answered questions about road conditions south of town that helped Terrence update his mental map of the situation. He was useful. He was human. He was someone's son. Then June came to me privately, in the maintenance room where the generator hummed in standby. "We need to talk about Sam." "I know." "Willa says the vein discoloration is progressing. It was at the wrist when she bandaged him. Now it's past the elbow. She can see it through his skin." "He seems fine." "He seems fine now." There it was. The question. Not whether Sam was dangerous at this moment, but whether he would become dangerous, and what we were prepared to do about it, and when, and who would decide, and on what authority. I gathered everyone except Sam. We stood in the maintenance room, 6 adults and a sleeping child, and faced the math. Dale spoke first. "I've seen men wounded in ways that were going to kill them, not in minutes, in hours or days. And the kindest thing anyone ever did was tell them the truth. That man out there deserves the truth." "The truth is, we don't know," June said. "We don't know the progression. We don't know if everyone who's bitten turns. We don't know if it can be slowed or stopped." "We know what the veins look like," Willa said quietly. "I saw the same thing at Meadowview. 3 residents were bitten by an aide who turned during the night shift. The vein pattern spread in all 3. All 3 turned within 12 hours. "He's at 14, Marcus said. "Which could mean he's resistant, or could mean it's just slower in him." Terrence looked at me. "You're the one who burned the barn. What do you think?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question from a man who recognized that I'd already made one impossible decision and survived the weight of it. "I think we can't make him leave," I said. "And we can't execute a man who's still himself. But we can prepare. We isolate him. We watch him. And we agree now, clearly, all of us on what the signs are and what happens when we see them." And if the signs come at 3 a.m. and the person on watch hesitates? Then we've already lost. We told Sam. Not gently, not harshly, directly. He took it better than I expected. I know what I am, he said. I can feel it. It's like a sound you can't quite hear, just below the frequency of your thoughts. It's getting closer. We moved him to an isolated stall at the far end of the building. He went willingly. He asked for one thing. If it happens, don't let me hurt anyone, especially the kid. I promised. That night, I took the watch nearest his stall. I sat with the Remington across my knees and watched Sam Aldridge through the metal bars of a livestock gate. And he watched me back with eyes that were still clear, still human, still afraid. And between us, in the 10 feet of concrete floor and the bars meant for cattle, the question of mercy sat like a physical object, waiting to be picked up. On the third morning, the radio in Terrence's Tahoe picked up something new. It came in at 6:47 a.m. A repeating transmission on a frequency Terrence said was reserved for emergency management. A woman's voice, calm and professional, reading a scripted message. Attention survivors in the Iowa Falls-Eldora Steamboat Rock Corridor. A civilian evacuation point has been established at the Iowa Falls Municipal Airport. Military escort is available for organized groups arriving by vehicle on Highway 65 from the north or D35 from the south. The evacuation window closes at 1800 hours today. Repeat, 1800 hours. After this time, the Highway 30 containment line will be enforced with lethal authority. No civilian passage will be permitted south to north after 1800 hours. This message will repeat. It did repeat. 6 times. Identical each time. Then the frequency went to static. Iowa Falls was 12 miles west. Highway 65 ran straight there from the D35 junction. In normal conditions, it was a 15-minute drive. But conditions were not normal. And 12 miles through open country with an unknown density of infected, between here and there was not a drive. It was an operation. Could be real, Terrence said. The frequency's right. The language is consistent with emergency management protocols. Could also be bait, Dale said. He was loading his .45 with the focused attention of a man performing a sacrament. Concentrate survivors in one location. Makes containment easier. Containment of what? Of us. Of everything south of 30. If they're enforcing the line at 1800 with lethal authority, they're not just keeping the infected out. They're keeping everyone out. That airport might be the last door, and it might close whether we're through it or not. We have to try, June said. Lily was in her arms, awake now, watching the adults with the clear-eyed attentiveness of a child who has absorbed the seriousness of her situation without fully understanding it. We can't stay here indefinitely. Food runs out. Water could be compromised. And if the containment line locks, we're trapped inside a quarantine zone with no support. She was right. Building C was a refuge, not a home. We had supplies for maybe a week too if we rationed severely. After that, we'd need to forage, and foraging meant exposure, and exposure meant risk. And risk compounded daily as the infected population grew and the uninfected population shrank. What about Sam? Marcus asked. We all looked toward the far end of the building. Sam's stall was quiet. He'd been quiet all night. I'd checked on him at 5 a.m. during my watch. He was awake, sitting upright, staring at the wall. The vein discoloration had spread to his shoulder. His breathing had changed slower, deeper, with a faint rattle on the exhale that wasn't congestion. It was something new, something mechanical. He can't come, Willa said. I'm sorry, but he can't come. He's still himself, Marcus said. He's still himself right now. In 2 hours, in 4 hours, in the back of a vehicle on a highway with a 4-year-old, we can't take that chance. The math again. Always the math. I went to Sam's stall alone. He was standing now, facing me through the bars. His eyes were still clear but narrower, as if the aperture of his consciousness was physically closing. I heard the transmission, he said. His voice was thinner, not weaker thinner, like there was less of him producing it. You're going. We're going. Without me. I didn't answer. The answer was in the space between us. That's fair, he said. I wouldn't take me either. He pressed his good hand against the bars. The skin on his fingers was gray at the tips. I've got a request. Name it. Leave me the hatchet and lock the building when you go. If I turn, I don't want to be walking around out there. At least in here, I'm contained. And the hatchet? In case I have a moment of clarity. One last moment. I want to have a choice available. I left the hatchet on the concrete floor outside his stall, within reach through the bars. I met his eyes one more time. He was still in there. Still Sam Aldridge, diesel mechanic from Iowa Falls, 28 years old, visiting a friend in the wrong town at the wrong time. Still human, still afraid, still making decisions that required the full weight of a self that was being steadily, irreversibly dissolved. Thank you, he said. I locked the building when we left. All 7 of us, me, June, Lily, Marcus, Dale, Terrence, Willa loaded into 2 vehicles, the Bronco and the Tahoe. We pulled out of the fairgrounds at 9:15 a.m. on the 3rd day. The sky was clear for the first time since this started, bright blue and empty. The smoke column from my father's barn was gone. The drone from town was gone. The silence was total. We turned west on D35, toward Iowa Falls, toward the airport, toward a signal that might be salvation or might be the last lie told by a system that had already given up on us. Behind us, in Building C, Sam Aldridge sat alone and waited for the thing inside him to finish its work. The first 3 miles were empty. D35 ran straight west through open farmland, and I could see a mile in every direction. No vehicles, no people, no infected, just corn knee-high and green, rippling in the morning wind like the surface of a shallow sea. Normal. Impossibly, painfully normal. I was driving the Bronco with June and Lily. Terrence led in the Tahoe with Willa, Dale, and Marcus. We maintained visual contact, 50 yards apart, moving at 40 miles an hour fast enough to cover ground, slow enough to stop or swerve. At mile 4, we hit the first obstacle. A grain truck had jackknifed across the road, blocking both lanes. The cab was empty. The trailer had spilled soybeans across the asphalt in a golden fan. We went around it through the ditch, both vehicles lurching over the uneven ground, and came back onto the road on the other side. At mile 5, we saw the first of them. A group, I want to say a crowd, but that implies randomness, disorder, humanity. This was a formation. 12 or 15 people standing in a soybean field 100 yards north of the road. They were in a loose circle, facing inward, motionless. Not the rigid posture I'd seen before. Something different, contemplative. As if they were conducting a meeting without words, communicating through the same frequency that produced the grinding sound, but silently. A conference of the remade. They didn't turn toward us. The vehicle's engine noise crossed the distance between us, and they remained still. This was new. Every infected encounter so far had triggered an immediate orientation response, the compass needle turn, the fixed stare, the pursuit. These were different, evolved, or perhaps occupied with something that mattered more than two passing vehicles. It was worse than being chased. Being ignored by predators means they're not hungry, or they have other priorities. Both possibilities were terrifying. "Don't slow down," June said from the passenger seat. Lily was in her lap, face pressed against June's chest, eyes closed. I didn't slow down. At mile 7, the Tahoe's brake lights flared. Terrence stopped. I pulled up beside him, and he rolled down his window. Roads blocked ahead. 3 vehicles, looks deliberate. Someone built a barricade. I could see it in 2 pickups and a sedan arranged in a V-shape across the road, gaps too narrow for a vehicle to pass. Behind them, movement, human movement, clear eyes, intentional posture. A man stepped out from behind the sedan. He was holding a deer rifle and wearing a blaze orange vest over a flannel shirt. He walked toward us with the measured gait of someone accustomed to authority or claiming it. "Stop there," he called out. "Turn off the engines." We didn't turn off the engines. I said, "Turn off the engines. This road is closed." Terrence opened his door and stood behind it, using it as a shield. His bearing shifted, the dispatcher became something older, something from before dispatch. "Terrence Oakes, Hardin County Sheriff's Office. Who are you and on whose authority is this road closed?" "Garrett Voss. This is my land on both sides, and it's closed on my authority." "That's not how road authority works, Mr. Voss. It's how it works now." There were 4 others behind the barricade, 2 men, 2 women, all armed, hunting rifles, a shotgun, 1 handgun visible. They had the hard-eyed look of people who had made a decision and intended to enforce it. "We heard the evacuation signal," I said. "Iowa Falls Airport. We're trying to get through." Garrett shook his head. "The airport's gone. We could see the smoke from the ridge this morning. Whatever was there, it's burned. The military pulled out before dawn. We heard the helicopters." The ground shifted under me, not literally, but the internal landscape, the map of hope I'd been navigating by, buckled and reformed around a new absence. "You're sure?" June asked. "I'm sure. My son drove within a mile of it 2 hours ago. The runway's cratered. They destroyed it on the way out, so nothing could use it as a staging area. The signal's still broadcasting because it's automated. No one's manning it." I looked at Terrence. He looked at Willa. Willa looked at the ground. "So the containment line," I started, "is real, and it's closing. My son saw guard vehicles on 30 heading east, spacing out, setting positions. By 1800, that highway will be a wall, and we'll be on the wrong side of it." The arithmetic collapsed. No airport, no evacuation, no passage north. The signal that had pulled us out of Building C was a ghost, an automated voice speaking on behalf of a plan that had already been abandoned. "We need to go north," Terrence said, "before the line closes. Not to the airport, through the line. There have to be gaps. There are always gaps." "There are," Garrett said, "but not for long, and not on the highways." He paused, studying us with the same assessing look my father used on weather. "There's a bridge over the Iowa River, 4 miles north of here. County road, unmarked. It crosses into Wright County, and from there, you can take back roads north of 30 before the guard fills in. My son scouted it this morning. It was clear at 7 a.m. It won't be clear forever." "Why are you telling us this?" "Because my son's on the other side. He crossed this morning and isn't coming back. And because someone should get through." I looked at his barricade, his people, his land. "You're not coming. This is my home. I was born in the house behind that tree line. My wife is buried a 1/4 mile east of here. I'm not leaving. There was nothing to say to that. Some decisions are so rooted in identity that argument is irrelevant. You either understand them or you don't. He drew us a map on the back of a cattle receipt. The bridge, the county road, the turns, the route through Wright County that would keep us off the main highways. Move fast, he said, and don't stop for anything that isn't clearly alive and clearly asking for help. We turned north. In the mirror, Garrett Voss walked back to his barricade and stood between his trucks with his rifle in his hands, watching us go. A man choosing to be a fixed point in a world that was coming apart. The county road was gravel, narrow, flanked by drainage ditches and cornfields. The bridge appeared after 4 miles, exactly as Garrett described a 2-lane concrete span over the Iowa River, unremarkable. The kind of bridge you'd cross 1,000 times without noticing. It wasn't empty. There were vehicles on both ends. On the south side, 3 cars were parked haphazardly on the shoulder doors, open, empty. On the north side, a single military Humvee sat crosswise, partially blocking the road. Its turret was unmanned. Its engine was off. The driver's door was open. And from 200 yards, I could see a dark shape slumped in the driver's seat. Terrence stopped the Tahoe. I pulled up beside him. Could be abandoned, he said. Could be a trap. Could also be our only crossing. He picked up the radio handset, the one from his Tahoe's mounted unit, and tried frequencies. Static, static, static. Then, faintly, a voice broken, scared, young. Anyone on this frequency, Bridge 7 is compromised. Repeat, Bridge 7 is... They came from the water. They came from under the... The transmission cut. That's not this bridge, Terrence said. Bridge 7 is further east. But it means they're in the river. They can use the river. I looked at the Iowa River below the bridge. Muddy, swollen from recent rain, moving fast. Could the infected survive in water? Could they navigate a current? We didn't know. We didn't know the limits of what they could do, because we were still learning the limits of what they were. We go fast, I said. Both vehicles, full speed, don't stop until we're a mile past the north end. And the Humvee? We push through. The Tahoe's heavier. You take point. Hit the gap on the left side. Terrence didn't hesitate. He put the Tahoe in gear. I dropped the Bronco into second. We rolled forward. The south end of the bridge was clear. The parked cars were truly empty, just abandoned. Personal effects scattered on the seats. The bridge deck was 200 feet of open concrete with low railings. The river below was audible, a constant rush that masked other sounds. Terrence hit the bridge at 40. I was behind him, matching speed. The concrete hummed under the tires. I could see the Humvee ahead, growing rapidly. The slumped figure in the driver's seat resolved into a soldier in fatigues, head back, mouth open, chest dark, with something that had stopped flowing. Dead. Not turned. Dead. The Tahoe struck the Humvee's rear quarter panel at an angle, shoving it sideways with a shriek of metal. The gap opened to 10 feet. Terrence surged through. I followed, the Bronco's mirror clipping the Humvee's bumper with a crack that showered glass into the cab. Then we were across, north side, Wright County. The gravel road continued straight between more cornfields, and the bridge receded in the mirror. For 300 yards, nothing happened. Then, in the mirror, I saw figures emerge from the riverbank. Not from the road, from the water, from the reeds and mud below the bridge, pulling themselves up the embankment with arms that bent wrong. Bodies that moved with a fluidity that had nothing to do with joints or muscle memory. 5, 10, 20. Rising from the river like the land itself was producing them. They reached the bridge deck. They didn't cross. They stood on the south end, a line of dripping, mud-streaked figures, and they watched us drive away. I pushed the Bronco to 60 on the gravel, stones hammering the undercarriage like gunfire. We drove north for an hour on back roads. Garrett's map was precise every turn, every intersection exactly where he'd marked it. The land was empty. The sky was blue. The corn grew in ordered rows, indifferent to catastrophe. At 2 p.m., we crossed Highway 30. There were no guard vehicles, no containment line. Not here, on this unnamed county road between fields. Just a highway, empty in both directions, stretching east and west toward a perimeter that might have existed or might have been another ghost broadcast another plan, abandoned before completion. We crossed it without slowing and continued north into territory that the automated signal had called safe, that the guard had called defensible, that reality had not yet confirmed or denied. Terrence's voice came through the Tahoe's PA speaker, which he'd rigged as a vehicle-to-vehicle communication system. "We're through. Keep moving. Don't look back." But I looked back. Once. Through the rearview mirror, I could see the flat expanse of Hardin County stretching south under the afternoon sun. Somewhere in that landscape was my father's farm. A pile of ash where the barn had been. A supply closet in a medical clinic. A livestock building where a man named Sam was waiting for himself to disappear. Beside me, June was holding Lily, who was awake now and watching the fields go by with the quiet attention of a child memorizing a world she was leaving. June's hand was on my forearm, not gripping, just resting there, warm and steady. "Elliot," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for opening the door." I kept driving. We found people north of 30. Not civilization, not the way we'd known it, but people. Scattered, cautious, armed and exhausted, and working the same math we were. Who's still human? How long do supplies last? Where's the next safe shelter? What are we becoming while we survive? I think about Mercy often. About Sam's hand through the bars. About Marcus's arrow that never flew. About my father's voice in the kitchen, calm and certain, asking me to burn something so I wouldn't have to watch it break free. He taught me the only lesson that mattered, though he didn't frame it as a lesson. He framed it as an errand. Burn the barn. What he meant was, act before the cost becomes unbearable. Decide while you still can. And when you can't save someone, make sure their destruction protects the ones who are left. The world didn't end the way the movies said it would all at once, in spectacle and screaming. It ended in increments, in kitchen conversations, in the sound a radio makes when no one is at the controls, in the space between a locked door and the scraping sound behind it. Lily asked me once, weeks later, if the animals ever came back to the building. I told her no. She thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "Good." I still hear my father's voice, not the words, the gravity behind them, the weight of a man who saw what was coming and spent his last clear hours making sure his son could outrun it. I'm still outrunning it. Some mornings, I think I can stop.